Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is a little different, and I wish I could hear your smiley faces and your voices, but it's going to be okay. So I figure we'll just get started. It is just great to be here, and I'm excited to share with you SQL Server 2019, implementing security with users and schemas and roles. So a little bit about myself, my work. I've been in software development for quite some time. We won't exactly say when I started or how old I am now. Mostly in Fox development. I've been working with SQL Server for 9.5 years now, not full time. I have a little CSS and HTML, but what I love most about my job is I love what I do, and that's helping our customers do their jobs better. I'm part of a huge community, which you are a part of too. I go to a group called GLASS. It's Greater Lansing Area SQL Server Users Group. There's also a group in Detroit called SPID, and it's all part of SQL Pass. They're a great bunch of people, a lot like you and me. There are conferences. There's one coming up October 27th, which is the USA version, and we're going to be here. So there's a little bit of conflict there, but they do, I believe, record their sessions as well. The 1028 goes to, it's international. I go to SQL Saturdays. COVID has hit, and they're now starting to show some online. I'm a speaker here at Virtual Fox. Yay! And Southwest Fox, and of course I always bring my son David, and he was really disappointed that we weren't going to Arizona today. Sorry, David. And of course SPID and GLASS, I speak at both of those. And I'm just so excited, very excited to be here. So today we're going to be talking about, of course, SQL Server and security, but it starts before SQL Server. It talks about, and we're going to talk about some of those security principles before we get to even SQL Server. We're going to talk about SQL Server authentication. There are a number of types, and we'll be talking about 2. Securing the SA account. There is an account that comes with SQL Server that is always there. It cannot be deleted, and we need to secure it. We're going to be creating logins and database users, and those are 2 different things. They're part of a huge group called Principles, and we'll talk about what that means. Also, when we move databases from one server to another, from one instance to another, we can actually orphan and cause problems for ourselves. And they're called security IDs or SIDs, and we'll be discussing on how to remedy that. We're going to be talking about permissions, what we have grants, denies, or revokes. We're going to be creating and dropping schemas, and we're going to be creating and dropping roles, database roles. So let's get started, okay? For now, I'm going to turn off my camera so that we'll have more screen real estate, because I'm going to be flipping from the PowerPoint slideshow to scripts, and we're actually going to be in scripts a lot today, and then just tab back and forth. So I'm going to turn my video off. Okay. So security principles. Now, security principles are principles before we get to SQL Server. They're principles, a principle of least privilege, the CIA Triad, which is dealing with data, defense in depth. So what do I mean by principle of least privilege? Security best practices, which is the security best practice, which states that a person or application should be given only the rights that they need to do the job and no more. The reason behind it is very simple. If a person makes a mistake, the amount of damage is limited. If a person is malicious or their password got compromised, that that the potential of the impact of the attack is also limited. The principle of least privilege should, like I said, apply to applications as well. So when applying it to SQL Server, if you don't need services such as SQL Server report services running on the same server as your main SQL engine, then don't install them there. The CIA Triad. Now this is talking about data security. And there's 3 areas for core principle goals. Confidentiality. Data is not accessed by unauthorized people or in an unauthorized way. Integrity. Data is not modified by unauthorized people or in an unauthorized way. Availability. Data is available whenever needed by authorized people. SQL Server should be configured for how your customer needs to set up their access to their data. For example, if a web service needs to connect, SQL Server needs to be configured in mixed mode. And the third principle is defense in depth concept. And it basically is adding layers to your security. When possible, use different security mechanisms to protect an asset like your PC. For example, let's consider the workplace. An external router to the premise, firewall to the perimeter, a personal firewall on the PC itself, and antivirus software running on the PC. And then you need to put in place maybe some methodologies as to how to update your PCs and servers and whatever that means when it comes to deploying a software. So that takes us then into authentication, and we're getting into SQL Server authentication. There are many types of SQL Server authentication, and we are going to discuss 2. We are going to discuss Windows authentication, and we're going to discuss mixed mode. And if you note that they're in the picture, they are right here, where it's Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. You can also have other accesses to Azure and some other. We are not going to be discussing that here. So Windows authentication is the default when you install SQL Server. And it refers to an integrated security because SQL Server security model is tightly integrated with Windows. So a specific window user and group accounts can be trusted to log into SQL Server. And when I log into my SQL Server, I'm using Windows authentication. I don't have to type in a password because I've already been authenticated. This is what Microsoft recommends, and it's always available and can't be disabled. There's also a mixed mode in SQL Server, and it supports authentication by Windows authentication, which we just got done talking about, and SQL Server, where the database administrator must maintain the users and the password pairs. So we're making the database administrator do double work if we go into mixed mode. And but there are good reasons why you might want to go into mixed mode. So let's go and look at a demonstration. Okay, so I've already logged on to SQL Server here in my system, and I'm just seeing how that's looking. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about how I set this up. Right now, I have a okay, clicked on the wrong thing. I have the database, AdventureWorks, and this is my SQL Server instance, okay? So, and along the side, you will see, let me scroll this, pull this over. I have numbered scripts. And of course, these were all delivered to you that you can download. And my sandbox is where I just play. And it's always at the top. So if I want to ever figure out something, I always have this sandbox to look at. But we're going here to SQL Server Authentication. So and these scripts, you don't have to go back to the white paper to find information about the various topics that are being discussed here. You will see where I have put resources and discussions about checking, in this instance, authentication. So how can I do this? Now, like I said, there are two different authentications. There's Windows authentication, and there is the mixed mode where it's Windows authentication and SQL Server. So if you set up SQL Server, and how do I know how my software, my SQL Server instance is set up? I can right-click on my instance and go all the way down to Properties. And in there, I can go to Security, and you can see in the very top, it says Server Authentication. And you can see here where my SQL Server is SQL Server and Windows Authentication mode. It's mixed mode. If I wanted to change it, I can just click that and click the OK button down at the bottom. However, I can also run the script to a new query window. And I'll just do that. And I'm just going to close this. And you will see SQL Server Authentication through, instead of running the code, I can actually save it to the script. And here you can notice that it's actually updating the registry, and it's telling it that it's switching the authentication. And I'm going to go back to my SQL Server. Okay. And when I do that, if I want to switch between authentication modes, I do need to restart my SQL Server. So I'm going to come down here. And here you go. And this is switching from mixed mode to Windows Authentication. And then if you come down a little bit further in the same code, I'm switching from Windows Authentication to mixed mode. And you can see the differences in the code ever so slightly. I'm actually not going to run this code, but everything's the same except being a 1 or a 2. And again, if I do switch, I do need to restart SQL Server. When I'm in Windows Authentication mode, I don't have to worry about passwords. Okay, but if I'm in mixed mode, I do have to worry about passwords. And I have to make sure that, that I secure any logins, and I also need to secure the SQL Server administration admin account, the secure SQL. I have tongue-tied. So, and we're going to get there from here. So basically, it's the SA account. All right. And so if I were to, I can now, if I want to look at security for the instance, which is logins, you will notice there is my SA account, and this is me logged into SQL Server as the Windows Authentication. Okay, so right now you can see by the red X that my SA account is disabled, and lo and behold, it's really easy to enable it, or maybe not, and it'll give you an error. Cannot enable a login that has an empty password. So what you can do is I can alter my login to SA, and I can create so it has a password. I can also do the same thing here. Whoop, don't want to cut that. Where I go to Properties, And under general, I can set up a password, okay? And we'll get more into this a little bit more, but we can also enforce password policies, and that's actually dictated by the operating system. And I'm going to click, and the other thing to note on this is the default database. Can you see that right here? Where it says master, you can also have it select something else as well. But we're just going to leave it as this. And I'm going to click OK. And it did it. Oh, I was expecting it to error. So let's run that. Okay. So if I wanted to, I'm going to go to a different SQL Server SSMS instance, and I am going to, whoop, wrong one. I'm going to connect. I'm going to connect to my database engine. And here, I'm logging in for SQL Server Authentication, and I'm going to log in as my SA. Okay, and I remembered that. Oh, it's disabled. Okay, so you really can't log in unless you have it enabled and that you got the password all set up. So, but that's how you would go into SQL Server Authentication. So let's go and enable it. Yay, it's enabled. And now try to connect again, have my password, and now I'm connected in. The SA is a scary user because it has God rights within the SQL Server instance. At this point, is there any questions on SQL Server Authentication?
Hi, Jody. No questions so far.
Okay, good. We're going to move on then. Thank you. So we're going to move on to, like I said, in mixed mode. When SQL Server Authentication is in mixed mode, it is a best practice to secure this SQL Server SA account. And that's our next topic. What is the SA account? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. The SA, System Administrator, which I got tongue-tied up on earlier, is a built-in user with administrative rights to the entire instance. It can do whatever it wants. And guess what? It's, of course, it's a sysadmin fixed server role. The default database to the SA is master. And the SA has all the permissions on the server and cannot be limited. You can disable it, though. It can't be dropped, but it is disabled for sure. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can. Whoops. And somehow I messed up. Oh, okay. To ensure the SA system admin is secured, you're going to set a hard-to-guess password. You could rename the SA. You can disable it, which I've already demonstrated. I even enabled it. And make sure that no other accounts exist that named SA. So let's talk about this unique account. So the SA, when you install, and if you were to use Windows Authentication, the SA account is created, but it's disabled. But as soon as you switch to mixed mode, you have the ability then to enable the SA. And there are some definitely strong password guidelines, and they're here on this link that you can select later. And you're going to want to make sure that it's at least 8 characters long. In SQL Server, you can have a password up to 128 characters, and it can be a combination of letters, numbers, and symbols. Some good best practices is not be found in the dictionary, not the name of a command, not the name of a person, not the name of a user or a computer. it's changed regularly, and it's different from the previous passwords. There are some caveats here, and I'm going to highlight those right here. If using OLE or ODBC connection strings, you cannot use the following characters, and they're highlighted here. These characters are used to connect to SQL Server and can cause you some issues. So here I'm going to make sure I'm on my SQL Server master. And the SA, even though it has the name SA, it can also be identified by its security ID, or SID. And if you can see that below, the name, the principal ID, and the SID. It's a SQL Server login, is disabled, and right now it's enabled, okay? And you'll notice the creation date. It's back in 2003, and I've been busy modifying it ever since. So, and it has some other policy checks and everything, and there's the password hash. So like I can alter it, I can disable it. So if I come here, you can now see that it is now disabled. Okay, and then I can make it enabled again. Yay. All right. So, and we saw that if the password is empty in the previous example, it will fail to enable. So we made sure that we had a strong password, and here you can alter that login like I did in the previous example. You can also check to see if there are other SA accounts, and here's some code to do that. Right now, we only have the single one. Another thing that you might want to do is you might want to actually alter the login with the name here. So if I come up here, my SA is now called old SA, but the SID, the security ID, is still the same. So if you have a malicious person wanting to get access to your SQL Server instance, they may look for this, but more than likely, they're going to look for this SID ID. So, and watch this. We can now go and create a new SA account. And if I come back here, and look, lo and behold, I now have 2 SA accounts. However, you'll notice there's the default SA account, but the one that I just created has a different SID ID. A SID, a security ID. Okay. So, and then I can drop the login. And I can alter and name it back. Whoop, I keep hitting the wrong F5. So let me do this. There, and then. So if I go look, I'm back to where I started from. And I can alter the login so that the password is null, is empty, not null. And so when I try to enable it again, it won't let me because the password is empty. Now, why would I want to keep the SA, rename it, or whatever? That seems like that would be a good thing to do. However, there are times where you're going to want to update your SQL Server instance, and Microsoft uses that SA account. So you might, if you wanted to do a SQL Server update, you might need to rename your SA back to the original SA. You might want to enable it so that you, in fact, can then run the SQL Server updates that you need. So that's going to be planned. So right now, what I do is I just make sure my SA is disabled and that there's a very, 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 very strong password on it, and it is not blank. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have a question from Shannon.
Okay.
Would you advise enabling enforced password policy or enforce password expiration on the SA account?
I would not. I think what I would do, instead of forcing anything as the database administrator, there are tasks that I schedule myself to do where I will purposefully make sure that that happens. I don't want the SA account to just, after so many days and then me scrambling. I want to have that a very controlled environment. Does that make sense?
Another, so I guess more of a comment than a question from, hope I pronounce this correctly, Gang Kai. He or she, I'm sorry, I don't know the name, is more interested in VFP connection to SQL Server using these authentications. Are you going to be doing some examples of that later on?
I am not. I'm going to be staying strictly in SQL Server. However, that's a great question, because after this session, I do have a session that's open for a half hour, and I can demonstrate that information to you. Okay?
That's it for questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those were great questions. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get to logins and users. So logins and users are not the same thing in SQL Server. A server login, a login is a security principle at the scope of the SQL Server instance. Has nothing to do with the databases. I can get into the instance of SQL Server. There are two main types of logins, which we have just discussed: the Windows Authentication login and the SQL Server Authentication login. Simply stated, a login allows you to connect to the SQL Server instance, okay? That is different than the database user. The SQL Server login, if it's a SQL Server authenticated login, will have a password. If it's a Windows authenticated login, that means Windows, I've already typed in my password to get into the Windows operating system, and then SQL Server just uses that authentication to allow me to get that Windows authentication to get into the SQL Server instance. A database user does not have a password, and there is an exception that we will not be discussing today, and that's the contained database user. But I do want to mention it, that there is a possibility to have a database user with a password on a contained database. Once you're connected to SQL Server instance, you will typically need access to a particular database. To allow access to the database, this login must be mapped to a database user. This was a tough concept for me to wrap my head around at first. So let's go to some demos. Okay, so I am going to go to the top of my scripts. And again, there are resources on how to create authentication using mixed mode. And there is also Windows authentication as well. If we are in mixed mode, we can then create that login and the password. And a way that we can easily do that through the GUI, the user interface, is we can right-click on logins, we can select a new login, and you can see it can be Windows Authentication or SQL Server Authentication. And I am going to do VFFox, and VFFox and VFFox. And now here you can see where that enforced policy, enforced password expiration, and user must change the password at the next login. But what enforced policy exactly are they talking about? So what, let me just do a little sec. I'm going to cancel this. So let's just talk about that really quick. So what's my computer's password policy? And the way to get there is I can right-click, see if this will allow me to do this. Right click. I'm going to click run. So it's going to click run. And I'm going to run this file, this little app. And it brings up local security policy. And if you come to security, and again, this is all in the white papers, you can now find the password policies. And basically all you have to do is right click to the properties, and you can see where the local settings are explained. Passwords can be changed immediately in 0 days. And there's explanations for all of this, okay? Age, again. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with this. However, my DBAs said some of these policies SQL Server doesn't honor, and some it does. And that would be a great next discussion, more advanced into how this all works. That goes beyond the scope of this. I just wanted you to be aware that this is where you can find it. And hopefully you can dig. So, like I said, you can come here, you can create the new login, or you can actually run code. And here, I'm going to make sure I'm in the master database, because that's where it's all contained. And it just says, and this is just saying, if the login exists, drop it, okay? So it doesn't blow up on me. Okay, and then I can actually create the login with a password. The check expiration is on and the check policy is on. So I'm going to run that. Oop, sure I am. So, and it did. So if I come, let's go to security, and we go to logins, and if I do a refresh, you'll see my user is there. And if I click and go to properties, you can see that those are all checked as I had told it, and the default database is master right now. That can be significant. All right, so let's go to my second SQL Server and SSMS, and I am going to connect, and I'm going to be my BFP, and I'm going to say connect. Oh, I need a new password, because remember, that's what I told it needed to do. Hopefully I did that right, and I'm allowed in. So if I come in here and recent files, here we go. So, and if you notice, as the VF Fox, I can run scripts. I can check out the logins. Yep, there's the essay, there's my Fox. I can check out principles. Yep, there's all the principles. And there's my VF there, he is too. And if you notice, there's my SID. And you'll notice it's a SQL Server login. And there's other information like server roles and everything. And I can check on permissions, and I can check on the database principles. So here I can check on the database principles. So what if I were to do this? If I check on AdventureWorks, whoop, it doesn't allow me in because I don't have access. I forgot to tell it that I needed access. So if I come back here, I'm going to drop this. It's not going to let me. There's a thing called a kill. And so if you have a user that shouldn't be in SQL Server in a different instance somewhere, you can then figure out who that is. And this explanation is the kill. And what I can do is I can run this script, F5, and you'll notice EFP is 61, 66, 67, and 69. So I can come over here, and there's that kill. And we're just going to go straight here. We're going to kill that one. And we're going to kill 66. 5. and 67. Oh. And run that. And we're going to kill 69. And we're going to run that. All right, so if I come back here and run this again to see if, nope, I'm not in any sessions. So now I can go create a login again. Oh, what did I just do? Because I need to, I know, I need to make that go away. And I can use the code, or I can just come over here, delete, and I'm going to say delete. Yep, I'm going to delete it. So that's another way to get rid of it. So I'm going to run this again. And I can run it. So now, that's just logins. Now to create, and you'll see here, if I refresh, there's my, but if I want to have the SQL Server, and you'll notice here, my default database is AdventureWorks. Well, it's going to fail on me because my AdventureWorks, if I come to its security and I go to its users, not login, users, I don't have a VF Fox there. So I'm going to open up that database, I'm going to use it, and then I'm going to create a user VF Fox for the login VF Fox. So there you go. So now I can now get in. So now if I come here, I might have to connect again, and it's going to, oh, let me, oh, look at that. Let's disconnect that one. I got too many open, and we're going to disconnect that one. Come in here, VF connect, VF 2020, VF 2020, and log in. And now look, I should be able to see my permissions on the database. Yay! And of course, this is how I can change passwords. And I'm going to do that so I can remember my password. Okay. And, oh, and then if you want to do Windows authentication, you have to have the Windows authenticated user there. And so if I were to select here, you should not find Windows authentication here. Nope. How about under principals? There's me, okay, but David's not here. So to set, and here's another where you can just, so you can see less of the record set. So again, I'm going to drop David if I need to, if it exists, and then I'm going to create him. And you'll notice the login is for David for this computer. The default database is AdventureWorks. And you'll notice that there is no password. Yay. Okay, are there any questions?
No questions so far, Jody.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, principals. Principals, like the logins and the database users, are entities that request resources from SQL Server. So a principal, and there's a hierarchy for that as well, and we're going to get to a picture here soon. And principals have a scope of influence depending on the principal. So a login has a scope to the instance. A database user is to the database. So, and a principal can be an individual or it can be a collection. Windows login again is an example of an individual principal, and then there's Windows groups, which is an example of principals that are a collection. Let's go here. But that is a long-winded definition. So an easier definition is a principal is an entity that is given access to a securable in SQL Server. Every principal has a security ID or SID. Get very comfortable with SIDs. In SQL Server, there are server level and database level principals, okay? And a scope is what the principal has access to, what it has been given access to. And principals can be groups and roles, okay? So it can contain 0 logins, 0 database users, or it can contain multiples, but it's an easy way to manage accessibility to your SQL Server databases, tables, even columns for that matter. So, and this is a very overview picture of what you might see. So here at the top is the domain, and then there's the server, the computer server, there's the local user, the local group, and you can see all these lines pointing into SQL Server. A lot of these go to SQL Server login from Windows. This is on the SQL Server instance. But there's also the SQL login. It's a second tier mixed mode, and there will be server roles, and then you can then go to a database user with a login, associated with a login, and then there's the database user without the SQL Server login, and that's used in the contained database. And then there's the database roles, which are database roles with also application roles. Securables, again, I'm repeating myself, that have permissions to grant it to them. So a table, access to a table, I can give permissions. Where the database table, I can give VFP Fox permission to look at a table. So let's go into principles. Okay. So again, a lot of information. There's a server database principles, sys server principles. There is the database principles, and if we were to look at the server principles, you can see there's the SA, there's public, there's sysadmin, and the white paper covers this pretty extensively. And VF Fox is a server principal. David is a server principal. I'm a server principal, okay? But then we come to the database, the specific database, and you can see that there are database roles that are part of SQL Server. There's the public, there's the DBO, there's a guest, there's information schema. But you'll notice because we added VF Fox to AdventureWorks right here, that it has access to the database, the AdventureWorks database. Okay, and then of course there's the logins, and you'll notice the logins, Windows authenticated users do not show up here. And one of the here's a script that lets me know who's in the system right now and how they're logged in. So I can see SA, I can see Fox is there, me there as well, and which databases I'm connected to or the login is connected to. And here we can see what processes that they're looking at, they're running. And you can see it gets it's interesting as you drill down into the metadata, what information is there. And you can see the SPIDs, and that's it for principals. There's not, it's just a way. Fox is a principal to the AdventureWorks database. It's a user, a database user. Logins, different. And is different than the database user, and it's also a principal. And then there's defaulted principals that come with SQL Server that can't be deleted or removed. Principles is sort of one of those sort of fuzzy topics, and as you get more comfortable with SQL Server, you'll be able to wrap your head around this better. Are there any questions?
No questions at this point.
Yay. Okay. I'm going to keep moving on. Okay. So, orphan SIDS. Now, remember, we have, if you were to take orphan SIDS, SIDS is that weird-looking, very long binary value that gets associated with a principal. And we saw where the principal for the SA account was the OXO, that kind of thing. So every SQL Server, every principal, login, users is associated with the SID, okay? So a user created from a login for this instance, the SIDs will match. However, if I back up a database and move it to a different instance, and even though that instance has a VFFox user, the SIDs won't match because and it's a security ID, and it's binary value, okay? The logins are associated by the SID and not by the name. So you can have the same name, but different SIDs, okay? And what will happen is your user won't have access to the database because those SIDs do not match. So let me demonstrate that. And this SQL Shack, it did a great article on how to, and it's very simple on how to remedy this. So right now, I want to come down. So I have my DFP here. It's a login. But for demonstration purposes, I'm actually going to drop it. Oh, because it's logged in somewhere else. Hold on. Disconnecting. Yay. And that's where that kill would come in handy. Okay. Yay. Okay. Got it. Okay. So now, check for the server principals. Nope, it's not there. So I'm going to check for the database, and there it is. And if you look, there's that SID. Okay. So and now I'm sort of emulating orphaning a SID. So check if this login SID matches the user login. And given this example, and there's a big explanation, let's see. So if I look here, this is the principal. This is for the master. This is the login SID. You can tell by the SQL login, and there's its SID. Now, if I come to the database login, they do not match. Another way to do that is here. Run this script as well. And you can see they don't match, the DB user SID and the login. So how do I fix that? Well, SQL Server did a really good job of, so all you have to do is alter the user in the database with the login in the SQL Server instance. So if I run this, it's thinking, yay. So if I come back here, we'll see that F5, that it now matches. So, so we can now have access to this, get to the database, because the login and the database user SIDs are the same. The other thing too is you can actually script out logins. So like for the SPID2 user, I can actually create a login and I can designate the SID here. So if I wanted to, make sure I'm in the master. So I now have my security login, refresh, and I actually specified the SID. So, and it'll just work. And there you go. So, and it matches what I had up there. So as a database administrator, you can come at this from a few different ways to help resolve your mismatched SIDs. Typically, you won't be moving databases around. However, in development mode, when I'm copying stuff to a customer, you know, especially when it's a startup situation, I might get orphan SIDs. And so I have to come to this code and rectify that. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have a question from Scott. When we have this problem, we run exec sp_change_users_login autofix, my username. Is there any difference in that versus your script?
I've never used that one, so I cannot comment. I am so sorry. But if you're willing to email me that information, I would love to see how you did that. Okay?
Next question is from John. All users of my application are connected to SQL Server using the SA user. Is that bad practice? Should users have different SQL logins? Yes,
it's a bad practice. SA should not be used. There's a vulnerability there. And what you can do is you can actually create, and we're going to get into it because I'm going to skip through permissions and creating schemas, and I'm going to come down to creating roles. And we're going to talk about the database role and the application role. So there, and let this sort of wrap your head around that, where you can have an application role in your Fox application, and it then can be applied for that application for that group of users. Does that make sense?
That's it for questions.
Okay. So I am getting closer and closer to 12:45. So I'm going to be skipping over some of this stuff because we're just running out of time. And I think what we really need to do is go into, and then we can always come back to the PowerPoint. But I want to jump down all the way to roles. Let me just go into permissions real quick. I will discuss it briefly. SQL Server Securables, tables, in the instance itself, the data, the DDL language, the data manipulation language, all of those have permissions, okay? And those permissions can be granted to a principal. And securables are objects that can have permissions granted to them, okay? And the permissions at the database engine are managed at the server level, assigning logins and server roles, and then database level assigned to database users, database roles, and application roles. And I'm going to scurry to application roles here in a few minutes. With permissions, you can grant a user permissions to do something, to select in a table, to update a table, to insert into a table. You're giving them access to that securable. Deny blocks access. So you are specifically denying a user access to a table, to a column, I mean, whatever. what deny will always trump, will always win. If there's a grant and deny on the same thing, deny will always win. And then, oh, I already said that. Okay, and then revoke undoes a permission. Whether it's a grant or a deny, it revokes that, okay? So it's taking away that specificity of that permission. And oh, there are 248 permissions in SQL Server. It gets complicated really fast. Here, let me show you what it looks like in this graph. This is the most current graph that I was able to find. It's a PowerPoint slide, and it was also included in the bundle that you can download with the SQL Server security. Anyway, this was for 2017. There in 2017, permissions was 237, and in SQL Server 2019, it is 248 now. Okay, I'm gonna close that down, but it's a fun read. So, and then there's the permissions, but I really want to get to the application role. So please read your white paper. If you have questions about this, we can also do it in the session following this presentation. So schemas. Schemas is a logical collection of database objects, and we can see that when we come into AdventureWorks. So you can see the various schemas. I have a DBO schema here, but there's also human resources schema. There's persons schema, production schema, and so forth and so on. And you can actually secure that as well. And here in the scripts in here, there is a way to create a schema and drop a schema, and there's all the code that's there. And then, and if we were to come to here under security, you'll find the schemas. Okay, so you can actually add your own schemas as well. Now, in reality, for a lot of my customers, I just use the DBO. I do not do security on the schema. However, I just want to, and in the white paper, it talks about it and it steps you through the GUI on how to do that. I just can't cover it here because I'm running out of time. So, and I would like to move on to the database roles, which is more relevant for what I do as a VFP application developer using a SQL Server backend.
Jody, before you move on, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
From Ray, if you do not specify a grant or deny permission, is deny the default?
If you neither grant nor deny, that's an excellent question. Let me just go here. Let's go here. I have to, let's see, go to properties for the user. So we got the general, and there's the default DBO, and you can also do owners. You can do memberships. So I can have the user be a member of these fixed database roles. So I can have them read and I can have them write, but if they aren't checked, they don't have access to that. Securables, I'm going to go over that. This is really good, really quickly. So I can specify objects. I can do objects of specific types. I can even belong to a schema, okay? And so if I were to come here and I said VFP Fox can only have access to person, if I click OK, they have no access to any other schema except person, all right? And you can then notice that I can now look at the various tables, and I can then, I don't want them to alter, but I can allow them to delete. I can allow them to insert. Again, they're still in deny. They just don't have, because I haven't specifically granted anything, and they will be quote unquote denied, because there's no grant either. So same way with select. And what's interesting is with select, you can get yourself into trouble on columns, because what will happen is if you grant a select, but maybe they're not allowed to see modify, your SQL script in your VFP application, if you said select star, will error because you want to display information on the modified date, and SQL Server is going to throw an error and saying you don't have access to that. Does that answer the question?
We can't tell.
Okay.
The other question is, what's the difference between a schema and a table?
A schema? A schema, I'm going to cancel this. A schema is a grouping, okay? It's a, like here is a person, and you can then grant permissions for that schema, okay? For a person. It's a grouping of tables, it's a grouping of stored procedures, it's a grouping of views. So if I, in AdventureWorks under tables, you'll notice that person schema is associated with the address table, the address type, business entity address, and so forth and so on. It's a very unique grouping. And so maybe you can have set up a user group that is human resources, and they can only have access to the person's schema. So you can grant access to that. It is different than a table, okay? A schema can have many tables. A table can only have one schema. Does that help? Any other questions?
That's it.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So I apologize for the speed through. Again, it's all in the white paper, but we're heading to roles. Okay. And let me get to my PowerPoint slideshow. Schema. Okay, there's the schema information. And now we're just going to go to roles. Okay, roles. Roles are the ability to categorize and label permissions. It's a lot like, in a way, it's like a schema, but roles aren't associated with the tables, the procedures, or the views, okay? This is a role that can, it's a way of organizing permissions for a group of individual users, a group of users. It can even be an application role, which we are going to discuss. There are fixed server roles and fixed database roles, having a set of permissions assigned to them. And if you look at this slide, this is the fixed server role permissions. This is on the server level, okay? So you're going to do bulk insert permissions here, and alter any logins. Those kinds of roles are done here. I am not going to discuss this. I just want you to be aware that that's there. The next one we are going to discuss is the fixed database roles and permissions. The fixed database roles, data reader. I can read the data. DB writer, I can write to the data, and you can see where it says grant, insert, grant, update, grant, delete. You can deny for a selection on a database or table. Same way with data writer. So, and it looks like I duplicated, so I'll have to look at that. So we have access here. The DB access admin can create a schema. But if you notice at the very tippy top that the database owner fixed database role has all of these permissions, okay? So there's the public, and there are, with the public, when you create a user, a database user, they immediately are part of the public role, and they can only view certain things down here. So let's go create a role. We're going to talk about setting up an application role, and then hopefully we have time, we can talk about dropping that role. If nothing else, we can create one, right? Because it's we're running out of time. So, and here again is the information on that. There's a database role, and let me go to where we can find that. And it's all contained within the security, and not under users, but roles. Okay, and I'm going to close that. And we have a database role, and these are the fixed database roles that come with SQL Server. Okay. And then, excuse me, I got to get a drink. And then there are the application roles, and by default, there are no application roles that come with this. And so what I thought I would do is I would demonstrate how to create an application role. So, and the application role is the person gen user. Okay, so I'm going to run this code. I'm just going to say if it exists, and you'll notice I'm using the AdventureWorks database because this is on a database. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to drop that application role. All right, and then I'm going to go create it. And you'll notice with an application role, there is a password associated with it. Okay, so and then I want to grant access to this application role, okay, where I want all the tables, well here, the current table, I'm creating a cursor, and I'm going to go through the schema for the person, and everything, every table in the schema of the AdventureWorks database for person, it's going to include all of the tables under person except for address type. And then it's going to just row by agonizing row go through that cursor, and it's going to build a select statement so I don't have to do the individual creation of permissions. So let me run this. And let me go check to make sure my application is there. There it is. And you can see, there we go. All right, and if you wanted to right click on the properties, you can then go check out what it has access to. And right now, not a whole lot. So let me run this. And then with the address type, it's going to just grant a select and an update. So I'm going to run this. Oh. Oh, great. Ah. Right there. I fat fingered something. There we go. Uh-oh, lovely. There we go. I apologize. So what this does, instead of me having to individually go through and select everything through the GUI here, what it did was it then took all of my schemas, and you can see down here, it allows for the address. I can delete, I can insert, I can do a reference, and I can do a select, okay? And I can even do an update. But for the address type, I can do a select, I can do an update, but I cannot, and I can do a reference. And the reference is used for foreign keys. So, so it's just a little bit different than everything else. But instead of having to go individually, that script will create grant, insert, and delete for all of that, okay? And so, and then it granted permission for the address type. So if I were to come over here, and I'm running out of time. File. I can use AdventureWorks, okay, and I can now, in my FoxPro application role, I'm going to run this this stored procedure and give access during this instance, okay? So let me do that. So now it allows me to select, and I can insert, I can delete, but when I do select here, it allows me to do that. Does it allow me to insert? No, because I didn't give it permission. So through a Fox application, you can now specify an application role in SQL Server that gives it access to the SQL Server through the application and not requiring a user login at this point. Okay, so I'm rushing here. So that's the SQL demo. For that summary, we went through a ton of stuff. SQL Server is not an easy topic to wrap your head around. It takes some time to get comfortable with. So we went through a lot of information. Some of it we skipped. However, it's all in the white paper. The white paper is over 50 pages long. And by all means, contact me if you can. I don't mind. I love helping people. Resources, websites. They're just phenomenal out there. If you're trying to decide whether if you even have installed SQL Server, just know that SQL Server has a developer edition that is free. You can download it. You can download the AdventureWorks database, and you can start playing with it now. If you have customers that want to think about SQL Server, they can get SQL Server Express 2017, 2019 for free. There are some limitations to that, but it meets a lot of people's needs. There are books. I've used 3 different books, just amazing information, and I mean hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. So don't feel like don't worry about feeling like a fish out of water. It's normal. And of course, please get involved with users groups. The ones I'm involved with is the Greater Lansing Area Users Group, SQL Pass in Detroit. There are SQL Saturdays. There's the group buy. Brent Ozar started that up. It's free. Pluralsight, it costs money, but great site. And there's so much more. Just Google it. I mean, seriously. And the SQL Server community loves to share their knowledge with others, just like you. Great people. Thank you for your time. Please fill out your evaluations. And thank you.
All right, there were a couple of questions at the end, but we're out of time. So
Right.
just want to remind everybody that Jody has a Q&A session in the sessions area. Over in the left panel, where you see sessions. If you click on that, it will show up. Maybe give it a minute or two, but it should show up Q&A with Jody Meyer. So give her a minute or so. She'll then go over there and she'll be able to answer any questions. You can ask them face to face because you can turn on your audio and video there. So thanks, Jody. Great session.
Thank you.